Good afternoon, everyone. It's a great honor and a privilege to be here talking with you today. Thank you for the World Press Foundation for bringing us all together, and as photojournalists being able to hear the backgrounds of the stories about some of the most important things going on in journalism in the past year. I want to talk to you today about the situation in the Philippines and my experience covering the story there last year. In the first 7 months of Duterte's so-called campaign on drugs, 7,000 suspects were dead, killed by police or armed vigilantes. In Duterte's war, you didn't need to be guilty to be marked. The people that I came across, that I photographed, were normal people. Some of them were drug users. Some of them had surrendered. Some of them were caught in the crossfire. Some of them were not even meant to be there and were killed. Some people were killed, especially in this culture of lawlessness, where police are going out, where people are going out and killing people. There were other people who also were caught in the crossfire. And over the course of 35 days, I watched how this campaign became an assembly line of state-sanctioned murder. 41 crime scenes I covered over the period that I was there, and 57 fatalities. Nearly as many funerals, and I'm just going to skip ahead. And what I did was, with all of the crime scenes that I visited, I GPS marked them. It's something that I'd been doing over a period of time. For previous stories, I'd started in the Pakistan floods a number of years ago, just marking locations so if you needed to get back. So we were able to use these GPS coordinates to put together a graphic and just to give like a visual understanding of representation where this was happening across Metro Manila. And as you can see, it's scattered all over. Most of these places were in the poorest of neighborhoods. Many of them bodies were found on street corners, in front of 7-Elevens, in front of McDonald's restaurants, bodies dumped on the side of roads, people killed in their own homes, on sofas, on bedroom mattresses, and in their living rooms. Nothing would prepare me for what I would come across. And on the first day that I arrived to the Philippines, I accompanied local journalists there, and the way that the journalists had already been covering it since July of last year. I had seen the reports coming out, and Noel Celis, whose work is here, is recognized here also, having seen his photographs of the prisons that had been overflowing because so many people had surrendered, sparked many of us to investigate and find out what was going on in the Philippines. So we accompanied with the local journalists, and we worked closely together. They had been already covering it for 3 months prior to when I had arrived, so I was learning from them absolutely completely. So most of the guys would gather as a group at a police station where they were called the night crawlers, the name that they kind of gave themselves, that they would cover the crime scenes, and most of them happened at night. So most of the investigations of what we did started by gathering at a police station and then waiting for news, either from radio, or many of the guys had contacts as well. So we would then set off on convoys, kind of zipping through the very sort of crowded city, which during the day is impossible to kind of navigate. But at night, it's certainly possible to get to these locations. The first night kind of set the tone for the rest of the month. The first scene that we came across was a triple homicide on train tracks. And there were probably a group of like 20 or so journalists that were there covering it from TV, from radio, and photographers as well. And we were there covering it, trying to understand what had happened. The police had given us one piece of information, that it was a shootout. What was consistent through the month is that we were getting, and what we knew from before was that we were getting all the police reports, and the police were saying that most of these were legitimate police operations and that they were going out and they were acting in self-defense most of the time. But at this first crime scene, we got the police sort of, brief on what had happened, and all of a sudden, everyone cleared out. All the journalists kind of like raced. There was news of another crime scene. And I remember leaving that scene and thinking to myself, well, how do we find out what actually happened here? We didn't get an opportunity to speak to any eyewitnesses or the family members of the people who had been killed. So I knew from the outset that the only way to get a clearer understanding of what was going on was to stay behind, was to interview witnesses, interview family members, to dig deeper and investigate on our own to find out what actually was happening. This is Romeo Joel Torres Fontanilla, and he was going out for a walk one night with his pregnant wife, and they'd stopped off after dinner on the way home, and wife had popped into a friend's place to get a glass of water, and all she recounts is hearing a motorbike, the sound of a motorbike, and then gunshots. And when she came out, she found her husband lying dead in the alleyway here. This was one type of killing by vigilantes, which was called riding in tandem, which was very, very common during that time. The police that were going in, they were conducting their operations, which they said were legitimate police operations. But when we interviewed families, we got completely conflicting information. The police would call it an official police buy-bust operation, and I'll go into more detail later on, but the eyewitnesses were telling us that the police were going in and killing people, dragging them down alleyways. This photograph is of a wake of Jimboy Balassa, whose body was found under a bridge. He had been taken by vigilantes from in front of his house. His neighbor also, we were actually covering the funeral of his neighbor and not knowing that that Jimboy's funeral was also happening. So we had gone and covered and spent time with the family members trying to understand what had happened, interviewing them and accompanying them in the funeral. And it was only afterwards that we were like leaving the scene, and we saw, right next to the house, there was another wake that was going on. So literally we went inside, and within minutes, found out that they were friends and they were actually taken at the same time. And this is Jim G not wanting to leave the side of her father, and she was screaming, "Papa, Papa," as the funeral workers were taking the coffin away. President Duterte had made it very, very clear that he was wanted to rid the country of drugs and was going to do everything in his power to do it. He'd actually likened himself to Hitler, and said that there were 3 million drug addicts in the Philippines and he would be happy to slaughter them all. So back in July, there was a so-called amnesty, and so 700,000 people surrendered and went onto a list saying that they had, were going into rehabilitation and were leaving drugs. A number of people were also arrested, and this kind of led to the overflow of jails. This jail had a capacity of 800, and when I visited, there were 3,600 people in this jail. So this is a basketball court in the middle of the jail that when the weather was fine, people would sleep, and when the weather wasn't that great, they would still kind of like sleep on the edges in this jail. We accompanied police on police operations as well to get a greater understanding of what they were doing. And, the nights that we went out with them, they would round up people and they would sometimes go and parade, drug users that they had, captured and display them, in a basketball court and gather them in these areas. As I mentioned, these killings are happening everywhere. This is in front of a 7-Eleven, and across the street is a McDonald's. This is the living room of Floor John Cruz, and Floor John was fixing his grandmother's transistor radio, when police burst into his home and asked him what he had in his hand. They ordered his grandmother out, and within 2 minutes, Floor John was dead. They later, in the police report, said that Floor John pulled out a gun. He resisted arrest, and the police defended themselves and shot him dead. His nephew and niece were upstairs and just around the corner and saw the men who killed their uncle walk out. And as they were waiting for the body to come out, there was one of the guys received a text message saying that their basketball team had won the championship. So they laughed as the body of Floor John was taken out in front of them of their uncle. This is the funeral of Joselito Rufino, and Joselito was playing video games with his 13-year-old nephew when 15 masked men walked across the train tracks and grabbed him. They yelled at everyone in the neighborhood to get back into their houses, and they dragged him down an alleyway, handcuffed him, and in a tactic that the police often refer to and talk about as non laban, the police were defending themselves. So they said that Joselito drew a weapon while he was handcuffed and tried to attack them, and they yelled out non laban, and they shot him dead in the alleyway. So the stories that we were getting, and we were, during this period of time, and I say we a lot because this isn't, I'm not working on my own. I'm working had the opportunity to work with an amazing journalist, Rica Concepcion, who had 30 years experience in the region as a TV journalist, and also our driver, Rodney Ramos, who we stayed up days and nights, covering this for a long month. Nothing compared to what Filipino journalists have been doing for the whole 9 months that this has been going on, and it is still going on. And we also work together as a team with all of the other journalists. We all shared information. We all accompanied each other to these crime scenes and followed up with families, interviewing eyewitnesses to find out exactly what was happening. And in most cases, the police would be saying one thing, and we'd request the police reports, and we'd get them a week later, so we'd be able to, find out what the official police line was, and then find out what was happening. And we would mostly get completely conflicting information of what was going on. This is the funeral that I mentioned before next to Jimboy Balassa was Aljon Deperine, and we had spent time with his family and covered the funeral. What had happened was that Aljon was killed. He was 23, and a week later, Danilo, who's in this photograph, was also killed from the same family, his brother. So we accompanied his mother, Marie, as she went to the funeral parlor, basically to beg for the price of the funeral costs to be lowered down. I mean, it had taken 2 or 3 weeks to raise enough money to bury their first son. And as I mentioned before, these are the poor, the people who were affected were in the poorest of neighborhoods. They had no opportunity for legal recourse. They didn't know their rights. And when we went to the funeral parlor, this is kind of like the overflow room. So the actual morgue is just around the corner. And you can see that the quantities, the other room was full, but the bodies which were stacked like firewood. This is what is commonly referred to as a summary execution, and many of the people, many of the bodies that we were covering were of these people who, many of them, we didn't find out their identities. Their faces were taped in packing tape, their hands taped behind their backs, and they would have a sign around their necks, usually a warning to other drug pushers, and I believe this one said, if you're a pusher, then you will find death very quickly. So these were done at the hands of vigilantes. Since the report came out, there've been a number of people who have confessed from the police and said that they had been paid to go out and as assassins and target people. And the people that were targeting were often the people that had actually surrendered. So people who were expecting to be getting amnesty were some of the people who were being targeted. And unfortunately, these were, it depended on which month, but, sometimes there were like 3 or 4 a week that were just sort of dropped off on the side of the road, usually in the early morning. And this is Nelly Diaz. This is probably one of the most difficult scenes. We arrived late, and Chrysostomo, her husband, had been shot dead in his house, in his bedroom, with 5 of his children lying next to him, and vigilantes walked in and shot him dead. And this was definitely one of the most haunting because, I mean, hearing Nelly's pain without, seeing, the actual crime scene was startling. And it was, this was about 3 weeks in, and, working with colleagues and, their photographs are being published on a day-to-day basis. And my photographs hadn't been published up until this date. And I felt completely futile and useless up until this point, I suppose, because nothing was changing. This kept on happening night after night after night, and there was like nothing you could do at all. And we would talk about this as a group with the journalists, and what we agreed upon was that in 15 years' time, when we look back at this period of time, what we're doing is so important because we're gathering evidence. Without the work that we were doing, people would look back and read at this time in history and only see one side, that these were all official police operations, that these were all drug dealers or drug addicts, and they deserved what they got. And our role was to give a full, balanced understanding of what was going on and the human toll and the people that were affected by this so-called war. This wasn't a war on drugs. This is a war on like the lower class, on the poor, on the defenseless. And these are the people who were being targeted every single night. And we would go and we'd almost know which communities that we'd be in. But this is the way that we kind of like maintained our, stamina throughout this period of time. And I keep in regular contact with a lot of the photographers there and the journalists, even in the last few days, just to, see how they are doing, see how the story is going. And this is still going on. It's still going on day and night. And I don't know if Noel is here, and maybe we can ask him a question about, what the situation is at the moment. But things aren't changing. And there was a large reaction when the story was published. The president's office themselves put out a comment saying that our report was completely one-sided. But I want to acknowledge the work of the Filipino journalists who day in and day out are covering this. I came in for a period of 35 days only, and I left. I get to go home. For these guys, it's a reality. For the people who are enduring this, it's a reality. When we were there, it was averaging 24 people a night were getting killed. This is Erica Angel Fernandez, who's 17, and a Filipino journalist, Patricia, did a more investigative piece. It seemed like it was a vigilante killing, but what happened was she had investigated further and worked out that it was more likely than not, it was a lover's tiff, and it was an ex-boyfriend that actually shot them dead. So, Duterte talks about lowering crime rates, but in this culture and climate in the Philippines, you can literally kill whoever you want and get away with murder at the moment. Sorry, and this is Roel, who was playing video games with his uncle, and we stayed around for a number of hours interviewing family members, and that's the spot down the alleyway just in front of his house where Rufino was killed in cold blood. That's the small bag that they'd placed the methamphetamine in and placed it on his body, and a gun found next to him there. But I'm over time. I could talk longer about this, and it's tough for me to talk about this as well. But what I can't stress enough the dedication of the journalists that are there covering this day to day. And if it wasn't for them, if it wasn't for all of us doing this, like the victims' voices, would not be heard. And our job is to make sure that their stories and these counter stories and factual stories are not forgotten. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I know that there are some colleagues of yours from Philippines on this festival, and you asked if someone was.
Noel, are you here, man?
Is Noel here?
Noel?
No, he's not.
There he is.
There he is. No help. Please come on down. Because Daniel, you were there at the end of last year for 35 days. As we now know, and I read it in your newspaper as well, things are only getting worse at the moment. It's not getting better. It's even
continuing. And Noel will be able to fill us in a little bit more about what is exactly happening in the moment. The war on drugs was suspended for about a week in January. But as you know, as I've been hearing from these guys, and we keep in touch on WhatsApp, it's still going on, you know. But it's
Noel, welcome. Thank you. But what can you tell us about the latest things happening?
The first 6 months, there's 3 types of deaths. The first one is like bypass operation, where police will say that there's a bypass operation and they will just kill. They'll kill the drug user, saying that he fought back. The second one is salvaging. So a drug user or drug dealer will just appear on the roadside with a placard saying, "I'm a drug pusher, beware." So something like that. And the third one is bypass. I forget, but right now there's another 2. They'll just kidnap the alleged drug dealer, and that guy will be missing. He'll be missing. And we talked to a community on a coastal community, and the community there said to us that the police are paying the fishermen to dump the bodies on the ocean. So we suspect that those were the missing guys. So it's still happening up to now.
Thank you, and I wish you a lot of chance with your reporting there. It's important that you keep doing that. Thank you very much. And thank you also, Daniel.